Welcome back, guys, to part 2 of drawing anime. In case you missed the last video, go and watch it. But we basically just covered drawing using the black line and sketching out the outlines of the anime character first. In this second part, which is about 9 minutes long, I think, you'll see me start using colour and shading. So I started here with the hair using, well, it's not the nicest brown ever, and to be honest, it's not what I wanted the final hair colour to be, but once you've added a lot of shade into that and highlights work really well in the hair, but the colour changes completely. You'll see that in a second. It worked out pretty fantastic, actually, because I am pretty new to drawing hair, especially. It's not something that comes easy to me. If you watch one of my other videos of the tribal warrior, I've tried to do the hair similar to that in the style, in the way that I've done it, using a base colour and then adding a colour on top of that, a layer of the same colour but a darker shade of it, where the shading should be. But on top of that, I do use an extra layer of shading just with a sort of a fairly high opacity black brush on a layer on top of that, which works really well. But in combination with this kind of colour shading, let's call it, it works really well. I was having a lot of difficulty with this because although I'm not too bad at copying drawings and getting the shading right, if it's already there for me, I can copy it. But this was working off the top of my head, which obviously it's an awful lot different. You can see in the top right, shining on her, I've drawn some arrows. This is just reference for myself to remind me that the light is coming in from that direction. On that big chunk of hair on the right hand side flowing behind her, that's where I've tried to sort of emphasise where the light is the most, but it's also the bit that I had the most trouble with. But once I'd added highlights and more shading, it did work well, but there was an awful lot of sort of faffing about with that, playing around, seeing what worked, deleting things, retrying things, just, keep going until I found what worked. I've started adding like a shading layer. This is normally something I do last. If you've watched any of the other videos, this is what I always say, it finishes off the image, makes it look really, well, makes it look finished, but it makes it look really good. But for whatever reason, I'm not entirely sure why, but I started doing this quite early on, before I'd done the rest of it. Because I was, as I mentioned, having difficulty with the shading, that just kind of helped me. I didn't want to spend too much time doing a darker brown on top of a darker brown, keep going, and then find out that this black shading just covered it all up completely anyway, which I quite often do, and you've wasted your time, basically. So I put it in a bit earlier this time to save me a bit of work and keep me on track, give me a bit of guidance as to where I thought the light would hit, where the shading would be. You can always turn it off anyway, because as I've said, it is on a separate layer. As long as you're familiar with working with layers, you should know how they all work. You can turn them off, turn them back on, adjust, whether it's in front of another layer or on top of it, on top or behind, should I say, sorry. But they are very helpful. A lot of people use them in Photoshop, I believe, but they're just as good in my paint. So once you've got most of the shading done, it still looks like it's missing something, and that's when you add highlights. In this case, I used a yellow, which it changed the overall colour. When you first glance at the picture, it doesn't strike you as just brown now. It does strike you as like a blondie brown. Well, once I've added the highlights. I started, I think, using the big airbrush, and you can see there using a yellow, but keeping the brush with a high opacity so that it's not too sharp on it, and then going over that yellow with an even lighter yellow or even a white with a sharper brush, just to get them final highlights on, to make it look like light is reflecting off them. That seems to work really well. I then moved on to the skin, which I was expecting to take an awful lot of time, purely because the hair took me ages. So I was, expecting it to take me a while, but luckily nowhere near as long as the hair. I guess that kind of proves that hair is a lot harder to do than the rest of the body. Again, I went back to shading here. This I thought at the time, it struck me as being really effective. Adding the shade into this top bit of hair onto her face made the whole image look a lot less sort of flat. It made it look a lot more 3D, and I was really impressed with the way that worked out. Again, same as the hair, using darker colours of the same colour, just darker shades of that colour on the body. I do go over this once it's done with I think it's some sort of blend tool. I think I actually used the blur tool on my paint, which blends it better than the blend tool in my opinion. I don't know why, but it seems to work, so I stick with that. You can see me doing that there. So it just makes the lines a little bit less obvious. The shading is still there, but there is no sharp line between it. Again, going over it with an even darker one here. I wasn't too sure of this at the time because it's quite a dirty brown colour, but no, once it's blended in, it worked out nicely. This, again, it's separate to the actual shading layer, but after doing the shading layer, working mainly with the hair, I didn't actually add too much to the sort of the body layer, and it still worked out well. The bikini, or the boob tube top and pants, you know, whatever you want to call them, were a lot harder than I was expecting. I had it in my head that I was getting like a black leather thing, and I thought it would work well because of the lighting effect you can get on my paint. You know, like I've done with the highlights with the hair, I thought I could make that look really good on black leather. However, it was much more difficult than I was expecting. It took me a lot more attempts. I actually had a few goes at this off camera, none of them went well. I gave it a go on this. It's not perfect. I'm still not overly happy with it, but it was the best I could do, and hopefully you can see what I was going for with, you know, light reflecting off leather. The white lines are highlights of where the top has been pulled really tight. Well, that's what I was going for anyway. So hopefully that worked out well enough. So for this I only used black and white, and I guess you could say I used grey as well, different shades. I used a small sort of thin grey line along the bottom and top of the boob tube and on the pants, and I was actually shocked at how much better it made it look, just that one thin line. I couldn't even tell you why, but it worked, and that's what counts. I tried to keep the pants very basic, one light on it, one shining part of it. Aside from that, I then moved on to the mouth, kept that really basic, just used a pink. I think I darkened the mouth with a bit on the shading layer, and then all that was left was the eyes. The eyes didn't actually work out as well as I'd hoped. If you watched the Tribal Warrior video, the eyes worked out quite well in that. But obviously anime eyes are not quite realistic. They're not too realistic anyway, and I had to experiment, play around, see what worked, see what colours worked. Again, I'm not convinced that I got it perfect, but when you zoom out, it still looks... it was better than I was hoping for by the end of it, you know, and that's what counts. As you'll see me doing all my videos, I had a reflective white light using the eraser tool, soften the edges, and I feel that really finishes off the eyes. And you know, it can be used on other body parts as well, but as reflective as that doesn't work on certain textures. It's the same that I used on the leather underwear though. And then I'm just adding some final shading. And for this video, there it is finished, but I felt I'd add a quick background. Literally took me a minute, and there it is. I really hope you guys enjoyed this because it took me a while. It was my first attempt. I'm pretty pleased with the outcome. As usual, you know, if you like the video, please share and subscribe. I've just set up a Facebook and Twitter, so please show your support. It's facebook.com/learningasiddraw or twitter.com/learningasiddraw. Cheers guys, really appreciate it.